This is Cold Start.
And today we're going to talk about essentially the wacky races in the real world. It's kind of when series did one-offs or kind of specialty races within their season that didn't line up with their typical schedule, but doing something bizarre. And series, whether it's NASCAR, IMSA, IndyCar, F1, they've done something like this throughout their history. So I think it'll be fun to look back on some of those examples and remember those days where it was like, oh yeah, MX-5 did an oval race?
This stuff always lights me up. Something that's a little outside the norm, outside of expectations. That's a recipe for something really interesting. And growing up, there was this cartoon called Wacky Races. They would race in these crazy contraptions of cars and flying cars and prehistoric caveman cars and all this stuff. And it always lent that idea that like, hey, we could be really creative with this racing thing. And we've talked about in some previous episodes, things have gotten a little tame, kind of stale. Like the recipe for GT3 hasn't really changed all that much in a long time. And so seeing things that look a little different, feel a little different, it makes this invigorated in a way that maybe we get kind of used to over time. And so I love seeing these races that are a little something different. Maybe the rules are different. Maybe they don't factor into a series. They're just kind of a one-off thing that people do just for the sake of this race.
Yeah, like they don't count towards the points. It's just for the love of it. Maybe introducing the sport into a new market, things like that. I mean, we just got off of NASCAR going to the San Diego Naval Base at Coronado,
right,
which was a phenomenal event. And yeah, I would consider that kind of a one-off. Yes, It is a points race. It does count towards the season. It's this crazy street circuit that they created kind of out of nowhere. But I don't think it's going to come back next year. I think it's kind of this one and done. It was really cool, put on a hell of a show. And it was something cool to bring NASCAR to San Diego, which it's never been before.
So the NASCAR race at San Diego, that was an example of an existing series. They race a bunch of places. This was just a unique first-time introduction racing in a new place, which is cool. And we see this a lot with street circuits, right? We decide that a new venue or a new city would be a cool place to put a street circuit. This one with the Coronado, the naval base down in San Diego, was a pretty rad one. And then also around the same timing, near and dear to your heart, of course, was the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, for which there is no series or points or anything. It's just bragging rights.
Yeah, it's just kind of a one-off event. So I think there's like different categories for these quote-unquote wacky races or these one-offs of whether it's a pre-existing series, doing a new track, new location, something different, new rules, right? Or if it's a racing organization, a sanctioning body that just puts on one event out of the year, which Pikes Peak is a great example of this. One race happens one time a year. It is kind of a one-off. It's unique in its aspect. Hill climbing in general is not unique in regards to motorsports, but that event, I guess especially in the U.S. and America, it is relatively unique, but that event is kind of a marquee event. It only happens once. I think another example down that category is also the Isle of Man, right? That's another event where it's a one-off. It's racing motorcycles around an island with no speed limits on public roads around a circuit, and it happens once a year. There's not a series to it. There's not a season. It's just a major event.
I was wondering about that. Does the Isle of Man TT have points that factor into MotoGP and the rest of their season, or is it completely a one-off, like it's divorced entirely from the MotoGP league? I'm not entirely sure about it.
The Isle of Man doesn't factor into the MotoGP championship points because it's kind of its own category. So road racing, we think about road courses and road racing a little bit different, but within the motorcycle realm, like an Isle of Man event is considered a road race because it's turning roads into the track. Now, there are a couple other road racing events that do occur within the motorcycle realm, but the most famous, the most marquee, the largest one is Isle of Man. But those road races, there's not a championship to that. It's kind of its own specialty thing, just like Pikes Peak, right? Running the Pikes Peak hill climb, you don't gain points that go towards a hill climb championship in America. It's just its own thing.
Yeah, in the same way that Goodwood is kind of like this too. That's a one-off. There's no series or points or anything. To contrast from the 24-Hour of Le Mans, which is, while it's sort of a one-off race, it's actually part of a series. And every year, WEC goes and runs this race, and it's part of their calendar. So I would say that doesn't count as a one-off the same way that these others do.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because, the 24 Hours of Le Mans is kind of its own, marquee thing.
Yeah.
But it does encompass itself into a larger championship.
And to compare that, there's the 24 hours of the Nürburgring, which just happened not too long ago. Very famously, Max Verstappen drove in the 24 hours of the Nürburgring and was heard commenting about this really funny, what was it, a Dacia, this entry-level, like, family econo box that was entered into the race alongside, professional race cars, GT3s and things like that.
Oh, the legend of the Dacia. Yeah, I saw so many Instagram posts about that. But yeah, the 24 Hours of Nürburgring is a prime example of an endurance race that doesn't count towards any sort of larger championship in regards to WEC, right? Now, there's a lot of endurance racing at the Nürburgring you have to do to qualify for the 24 hours of the Nürburgring.
Right.
But it's all within its own, it's of one track. It's of one racetrack.
It's totally separate. Like, they had a separate racing league called VLN, which was a Nürburgring-based racing league in Germany, and all the races would take place there in a combination of the large Nordschleife track and the Grand Prix track. This is different than that. This is a one-off race that happens once a year, and it is a standalone event, and it's exciting, and it's cool to watch, and it has its own fanfare and its own flavor, but it doesn't nest into any points or championships or anything like that. Again, it's just sort of bragging rights for who could, be crowned as the winner of this cool individual race.
So speaking of these wild one-offs, I think it might be advantageous to break it down into categories.
Okay.
So let's talk first about the sanctioning body of NASCAR. Now, what are some of these weird one-offs that NASCAR has done in the past?
Yeah, well, NASCAR has this thing called the Clash, right? And I guess this has changed over time. They would do this as a series of races that were lead-ups to the Daytona 500, and then eventually they moved to, like, the LA Coliseum for a while. This year was really interesting. It was kind of the first time I actually paid attention to this. And it's now at a place called Bowman Gray Stadium, which is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So total NASCAR country.
Oh, 100%.
And it's a historic short track, so it's even more like aligned with the NASCAR ethos and kind of as this lead into the series. But it has nothing to do with the points for the year. It's not part of the season. It's its own standalone thing. The thing that was so memorable about it this year was it snowed at this race. It was in January in North Carolina, and there was snow and sleet and all kinds of, like, hijinks going on because nobody could get out there and drive. So that was kind of my introduction to the NASCAR Clash. Even though I had heard about it, I'd never really tried to tune in.
It's funny how NASCAR always picks, like, the tracks to go to that have terrible weather. Like, you think, like, in the beginning of the season during the winter months, they would start on the West Coast where, like, we don't have as many issues with weather.
Right.
But that's a story for another day. But, yeah, the concept of the Clash was always this kind of, like, preseason to get you riled up before the 500. No points or anything like that, but, some bragging rights. The Clash used to be, at least when I was growing up, it was at Daytona. They would do these, like, mini Daytona races, and there'd always be excitement, and there'd be crashes, and there'd be, like, all this hoopla going on. And then it was really interesting when they stopped doing it at Daytona, and then they started doing these, like, mega short tracks with it. Like, when they went to the LA Coliseum, I think we know the size of the LA Coliseum. How can you fit cars in there?
Right.
It seems almost impossible. And it was this really tight, small circle track. And the racing, I mean, it was interesting, right? But like anything gimmicky within motorsports, it's going to last a couple years. The third year, you're not going to make any money off of it. And you're going to lose your ass if you do it a fourth year.
Yeah.
And so they moved it on to Bowman Gray, which that makes way more sense because Bowman Gray Stadium, they at least do circle track racing there already. And there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of great fights that have happened there in the past of just, short track racing.
Yeah, nostalgia plays a big part of this too, right? So it's cool to look back to a place that's been historically relevant and has meaning to this particular series, right? And bring it all together there, even if it's maybe a little outsized for the venue, bringing NASCAR to such a tiny little place. Can you imagine NASCAR at, like, Calistoga Speedway?
Oh, well, Calistoga is also dirt, which
Yes.
that wouldn't be the first time that NASCAR's been on dirt. So this is another kind of one-off thing. We think about NASCAR racing, and it's all paved ovals, road courses, and now in recent years, street circuits.
Right.
But NASCAR has done these one-off dirt tracks. They actually put dirt on Bristol.
Right.
So it was racing cup cars on dirt at Bristol. And it was the same paved Bristol track that we know in the calendar for NASCAR. And they trailered in a bunch of dirt to lay it on the track. So they've done that for the Cup Series. They also did trucks at Eldora a handful of years.
Yeah.
This was a while back, but they did a handful of races with the trucks on dirt at Eldora. And I think it's kind of cool. Like, once again, we could argue that these races are kind of gimmicky, right? But it's kind of throwing it back to like the early days of NASCAR. They had dirt tracks. That was a part of it. A lot of people that race in NASCAR came from a background of racing on dirt tracks when they were younger, in whatever series that was.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool to see them like Goodyear having to develop a dirt tire for the cars and them running on the dirt, and there's chaos and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's unfortunate, of course, once again, like any gimmick, it lasts a handful of years and they move on to something else.
And these one-offs do occur in other territories, right? This is Cold Start. We talk about cars and motorsports here, but elsewhere in the sports world, just to provide the overlap, you mentioned Bristol. They brought in a bunch of dirt there for the NASCAR race.
Yeah.
They played baseball at Bristol as well.
Yes, I do. I remember that.
They had a one-off game that they brought the dirt in again, and they put a full Major League Baseball game at Bristol.
See, I think that's a great crossover to make, is like other sports do these kind of one-off events to like gain, popularity, to gain viewership, whatever it is.
Yeah, they called it the Speedway Classic. That was such a cool tie-in.
And I know that like hockey does like the summer something, or where they put hockey stadiums in different locations as well. I know when they were talking about the Coronado race at the naval base, that they had one of the aircraft carriers in the background, which was so cool to have that as kind of like the backdrop.
Oh, yeah.
But they were saying that they had hosted a college basketball game on top of the aircraft carrier one year.
Oh, no
so
way.
It's like this whole sports things of trying to make it unique and stuff like that. It goes through everything. It's just these are the motorsport examples. Now, the last one I want to mention with NASCAR of kind of going to these new locations and doing different things.
Yeah.
The last Wacky races. I think this is the wackiest one if we think about it. But back in the 90s when NASCAR was becoming really, really popular, they actually made a trip over to Japan. Now, this wasn't a points race, but they raced at Suzuka. And if you think about the late 90s within NASCAR, they were only going to 2 road courses. They were only going to Sonoma and Watkins Glen.
Yeah.
So it was very unusual for them to make the effort to ship a bunch of cars to Japan.
To drive on a road course.
Now, they went to Japan in 96, 97, and 98. So this was a 3-year venture that they did going over to Japan. And the coolest thing was, I mean, obviously this was the era of like Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Gordon, like a lot of big names that went over there. There were some teams that opted out. They didn't want to spend the money to ship the cars over. But they also invited a lot of local Japanese drivers to jump behind the wheel and race with the NASCAR drivers. And because it wasn't a points race, it wasn't this big serious thing of like, oh, let's go head to head and this, that, the other. Like, they just had a really good time with one another. And there's actually great clips online of one of those Japanese drivers essentially drifting a cup car almost through every corner.
Dude, that's so sick.
And all the other NASCAR drivers were like, damn, they have really good car control over here. They were super impressed.
Man, there's all kinds of opportunities for one-offs that we could talk about, but let's focus on those things that exist first before we go into speculation territory.
Yeah, and like most recently, NASCAR went to Mexico. And they did the F1 track there in Mexico and did a handful of races. And NASCAR's also been great about like trying to bring in drivers. I know this isn't one-off races, but like talking about having those Japanese drivers jump behind the wheel. Sure. I mean, just recently at San Diego, we had Kevin Magnussen jump in one of the cars from F1. Kimi Räikkönen's jumped in a NASCAR truck in previous races as well. So once again, these efforts from the associations to kind of bring new eyes to the motorsport. Now, switching gears from NASCAR to maybe IMSA a little bit, or kind of like touring car racing, or like, closed fender road course racing.
Sure enough.
But making that transition of going from ovals to road courses, there was a series that took their road course cars and did an oval race for a couple times. And I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, but the MX-5 Cup for 2 years in a row did an oval race, which MX-5 Cup cars, they exclusively do road courses and street circuits.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, someone had the harebrained idea of like, what if we get all the MX-5 Cup cars together and we do an oval race?
Right.
And this sounds like a total iRacing lobby move of like ridiculousness in the virtual world. But they ended up doing 2 races in 2024 and 2025. They raced at Martinsville.
Oh, jeez. Here we go again. Back with Martinsville.
And so the Cup cars raced at Martinsville, and they did like a high stakes race. There was a decent purse at stake there. And so it brought a lot of those guys to come out and do that event. Both of the races were really exciting, but like I would say from a viewer perspective, those cars didn't look at home on an oval. So like, I don't know. It was once again one of those things where like, this is funny, this is cool to watch, but like the continuation factor I don't think was there.
Yeah, I think there's a point where a one-off can be something that's unique and unusual, and you see it and you're like, wow, that was so cool, let's do it again. And then there's the one-offs that we do where like, yeah, that didn't quite come together the way we expected. Maybe we'll just leave that a one-off and we won't return to it. I remember back in the 80s, I think it was, maybe it was in the 90s, Formula One raced in the parking lot of Caesar's Palace in Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah. Well, like, and it's funny to talk about F1 of like back then, the USGP was considered kind of a quote-unquote one-off.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we're so used to F1 coming here, we now have 3 races on the calendar.
That's right.
But back then, the gimmicky thing was coming to the States and bringing F1 cars.
Right. It's so unusual that we're going to go have a race in the U.S. So, like, let's just count
Right.
that as like a throwaway thing, what have you. And it's funny because NASCAR and IndyCar, you know, they have such a presence. They can have their footprint really be all of the Americas as much as we think of that as a USA American kind of a sport.
Yeah.
You know, Can-Am was one of the best racing series that we've had in history, Canada and the US coming together, right? We have an amazing amount of burgeoning new racing and stronger programs coming out of Latin America. I think there's so much potential there for us to find other venues in places that seem obvious to race that we just don't go to those, right? Like,
Right.
there's no NASCAR in Argentina or Brazil or Mexico. And well, I guess we had the one race in Mexico, but that was it, right? And so there's just huge opportunity, I think, for more of those kind of things to happen.
100% of like bringing what I would say is like a race series that is supposed to only exist in a certain region,
Yeah.
but doing these one-offs and going elsewhere. Like NASCAR predominantly is a U.S. motorsport, but how cool it was for them to go to Japan, to go down to Mexico, to do these one-off events and do these kind of outreaches. And NASCAR isn't the only ones that have done this in the past.
That's right.
Another great example of kind of this one-off of a series from one region expanding and going somewhere else, the V8 Supercars, which is the Australian racing series.
Right.
And they obviously only race in Australia. It's its own continent in the middle of the ocean. So like it's kind of hard for them to get outside of that and go elsewhere. But back in 2013, the V8 Supercar Series actually came out to COTA, Circuit of the Americas, and
right.
they did a race here in the States.
And did they bring out like those Holden Commodores or whatever it was that they were driving in the series?
Yeah, it was
Sick.
100% all of the V8 Supercars that were racing over in Australia. They shipped all the cars over and did a V8 Supercar race for Americans. Now, I guess it wasn't highly successful for them to come back and do it again. Once again, you have to think about the costs that it takes to transport all these cars and make these events happen. And
Right.
if you don't see that return, you're like, there's no point in us doing this again. I'm kind of bummed because like I'm a really big V8 supercar fan and I've always wanted to see those cars in person.
Yeah.
And so selfishly, as an American that's a fan of an Australian motorsport, I would want to see him come back again and get an
Yeah.
opportunity to see those cars live without having to travel all the way to Australia.
Yeah, sort of an extension of this is what they've done with Euro NASCAR, right? Where they took what was inherently this American stock car kind of sport, they brought it over to Europe. There aren't all that many ovals over there, so they run a majority of
Yeah.
road courses, but there are a couple, and they've made that work, and it seems like kind of a one-off series in a way like that.
Yeah, 100%. Now, another series that did this of kind of like branching into the American market and just bringing a race over to the States was the WTCC.
Oh,
So the
yeah.
World Touring Car Championship. Once again, back in 2013. I guess there was like a good deal in 2013 to transport cars over the ocean to America. I don't know. Maybe they collaborated with the V8 Supercars and they all hired one big ship to do it. But they came over to Sonoma Raceway in 2013. And I remember I went to this race and I saw these cars, which the WTCC is like the touring cars, like the touring cars that we know about, like BTCC, all that sort of stuff. They were those cars, which was super, super cool.
Killer.
And I remember walking through the paddock and seeing these cars, and there was like a whole area in the paddock here at Sonoma Raceway that was taken up by shipping containers because all of the cars came in on shipping containers. They came in on a
Wow.
boat, they put the containers onto trucks, transported them here, dropped them off, and I remember like they opened up the doors and like rolled out the cars, rolled out all the gear, all this sort of stuff, and they put on a race here at Sonoma Raceway, which is like just another one of those things that's so cool to see these series that only exist in certain parts of the world branch out and do one-off events and kind of try to grow their fan base, or these people that have been fans forever that are like, oh, well, I can't get to you, but them coming to your hometown, how cool of a thing that is.
I wonder if there's the potential for more of that because I kind of feel like people are going to start to think about the environmental impacts of shipping a bunch of cars around all over the world. And, shipping stuff by sea, man, that takes a long time. So you really have to have a plan and logistics all in mind. And
100%.
things go badly, like containers fall off of ships and stuff,
Yeah, but like Formula One doesn't.
It's true.
And I mean, like they have a smaller field than maybe other racing series do.
Yeah.
But they travel the world. I mean, if you
I
want
think
to
they fly their stuff.
Yeah, but if you want to talk to someone about logistics of like how do you get things from point A to point B,
oh, no doubt.
F1's a great example to be able to talk to. Now, kind of branching off this of like mulling my brain, I'm like, damn, like NASCAR doing all these cool things. Like I haven't looked into it if NASCAR's ever done a race over in Europe to blow the European mind of what American V8 is all about. But how cool would it be if like the Cup Series and the O'Reilly Series and the Truck Series did a race at Silverstone?
Oh, no
like,
kidding.
What a just weirdly out there thing to do. Like, those cars on that track, in my mind, would be so sick.
Yeah, I mean, just the juxtaposition of those unexpected things together
100%.
kind of makes me laugh just to think about it, It would be so much fun to watch that. Now, there's a lot of these events that have been orchestrated over time that are one-offs that they run every single year, and there's special rules, like you can only have this kind of car, you can only enter if you have this sort of background. One of the really famous ones of those is the Mille Miglia, which is the 1,000-mile race in Italy over public roads. And what's really famous about that race is this was originally run in, like 1950 or 51 or something like that.
Yeah.
And the only cars that are allowed to enter are cars that could be eligible to enter the first Mille Miglia. So it literally has to be from the couple of year period that they decide and the exact same models of cars. So you need to go find like an old Mercedes-Benz 190.
Oh, so they're still doing it, but it's kind of like a vintage event now.
Correct.
Where it's like if you want to run it, you have to still bring like quote-unquote original equipment.
Yeah, so if you want to go run the Mille Miglia, the first thing to do is you have to go find a car that's eligible. And there's this whole secondary market of people who sell these cars to each other so that they can enter into the Mille Miglia. And then if you're there and then you're the car that, was originally historically part of that race, it's supposedly a really cool event. Like I've heard stories about people who go there, and if you drive into these little towns all over Italy and people are just pouring out into the streets to see this race happen because it's such a cultural event, the thing I heard that kind of blew me away is when people come in a Ferrari, like the emotional response it gets from the crowd and the people in the street, like people literally start weeping and crying in the streets because this Ferrari comes through and it's so beautiful and it gives them this feeling of like the tricolore, proud to be Italian kind of a thing. It's a really neat experience from everybody I've heard who's done it. It's one of those things on my list.
So that event, they're driving on public streets. I'm assuming they don't shut down the streets like they used to back in the day, because like, wasn't the Mille Miglia like a full-blown race back in the day where like you could break the speed limit?
Yeah, it was literally like legit a motorsport, like timed racing to see who could be there the fastest.
Go as fast as possible.
Yeah, and I think it's become a little bit more of a vintage processional, like timed rally.
Quote,
like
rally.
Yeah, where it's more of like, it's prestigious and people get dressed up and it's historic and it's kind of cool. And the cars that they run, every one of the cars that enters this race has to be built between 1927 and 1957 because the original race was established in 1927.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it is like still a cool event, but like more so like a gumball rally, effectively.
And
a
again,
vintage gumball.
Very Italian culture thing. So to give you some idea, the world's most beautiful race, they call this, which was coined by Enzo Ferrari, who also drove in this race and won it.
So he's got a little bit of a bias here.
Show
off his car, sell it to a couple of people, drive him through the countryside, make people fall in love with Ferrari.
Yeah, and they did really run it as a race for a while, at which point it got out of hand and there was a crash in 1957 that killed a driver and a co-driver and 10 spectators. So they canceled the event for a year. They brought it back, and I think it's now more of this sort of processional, ceremonial event more so than like a pure road race.
Which that makes me think about like back to the Isle of Man conversation of like, it still shocks me that that event is still going on.
It's hard to believe. Like, I think every single one of us watching this thing is enjoy it while you can because it's not going to be around for much longer.
Right. Which, I mean, I remember in Pikes Peak, kind of another one of those one-off things where you're like, damn, like this still exists, like pretty low safety requirements and things like that.
Yeah.
But I remember at Pikes Peak in regards to like spectator safety, it wasn't until like a handful of years ago, maybe like 5 or 10 years ago, that they like established certain spectator zones. Like, hey, you can't stand here, but you can stand here. Mainly kind of like where the start line was, of making sure that people weren't on the outside of corners in case anything went wrong kind of deal, which they never had like a really bad accident in regards to spectator safety. They did have one crazy crash happen kind of at the start of a hung throttle and the car went into the trees. And thankfully, no one was hurt in that instant, but they saw that and they're like, all right, maybe we need to like define where people are and are not allowed to stand.
Yeah, no doubt. I think this is one of those cases where we look at the event itself. There's such a high level of danger for the people who are participating in it. We need to realize that extends over to the fans, the people attending these races as well. And yeah, I think we've learned through a lot of very bad examples of where this can go wrong, how to manage it. And I just worry, the Baja Rally is another one of these, the Baja 1000 that runs through Mexico, the Baja, California.
Yeah.
That's a race that they run every year through the desert, and the stories are that the course itself is booby-trapped by locals because it's exciting to see, trophy trucks roll over and stuff like that. And so, man, that's another one of these where you're like, how much longer can this keep going if it's going to be going like that?
100%. And they have the same issue, too, with like spectator safety. It's like down in Mexico, you can basically stand and set up camp wherever you want. Like, you need to be smart enough to understand where the race course is and where it isn't. And I mean, I've seen firsthand being down there of like trucks going through campsites and like they themselves get lost or they miss a corner and they have to cruise through people where they set up in lawn chairs and easy ups and stuff like that and trying to find their way back on course. So, and there's been incidents too of like if a truck lands like one thing off and thing like that of coming up and over a jump, and it's crazy. And it's one of those things where like, yeah, it is still kind of like one of those things that is pure or true motorsports. But once again, people's safety is definitely going to be a forefront.
One of the things that still resonates in my mind, or I can't get the image out of my head, is talking to somebody who did some trophy truck racing in the Baja 1000, talking about how, they run with no windshield.
Yeah.
So they're just driving through the desert, and all of a sudden this giant piece of sagebrush cactus will fly in and like thump, right into your chest. There's like these needles from a cactus that just landed on you. Can you imagine just like that kind of race, what that's about?
Oh, it's super gnarly. And like, to an extent, that's kind of what makes it glorious. And like, that's why we talk in these ways about these events of like, we don't want them taken away, because the appeal for the participants is the danger, is like going through hell effectively. Like the Baja 1000 is not a race for someone that wants to be comfortable. It is a grueling event.
Yeah, these rallies tend to be like that. The Paris to Dakar rally is another one, right? You're driving through conflict zones. Like there's
it's supposed
war
to be
going
gnarly.
On. Yeah.
Like that's the kind of the point of it. And same thing with like the Isle of Man. It's supposed to be gnarly. It is supposed to be on the edge of death. That is what makes those riders and those participants so excited about it.
Well, speaking about being on the edge of death, there are also some, I'll say, more amusing but scary as hell versions of this that exist out there that I think are a little more tongue-in-cheek or for entertainment more so than pure motorsports. And also in Europe, I think they have a knack for interest in these sort of one-off weird variants. Maybe having a little fun out there might be something that they're after. In the Netherlands, there's this kind of racing that they have called achteruitrijden. I'm going to keep trying to say it in Dutch. Ready? Achteruitrijden. Achteruitrijden. Yeah.
You could pronounce it correctly or wrong, and it sounds
Nobody
the same
knows
to
the
me.
difference. Well, it's called DAF. So DAF was a Dutch auto company. They made cars in, I want to say, like the 50s and 60s, and they got bought out by a truck company or something. But the cars that they made were unique at the time in that they all used this continuously variable transmission, what we call CVT.
Yeah.
Like we've seen in some Hondas and other cars.
Yeah.
And enthusiasts hate these things, right? Because like you don't shift. There's no point at which you shift in the...
Well, and the funny thing about CVTs was I watched something on Instagram the other day where it got banned from F1 because it was too good.
It's crazy, right? Because there's no penalty time in shifting gears, right? There's that little
it
glitch
just holds
time.
it at the right RPM, the ideal RPM for performance.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we all crap on CVT gearboxes in like everyday cars, Nissans, Econo boxes, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But do people know the CVT is the preferred transmission because it got banned from F1 because it was too successful.
Well, one of the other attributes of CVT that nobody really thinks about, because like, why would you use this? Mathematically, they are theoretically capable of driving exactly as fast backwards as they can forwards. And as we know, most production cars, race cars, the reverse gear is always a little weak, or it's not rated for actually like speed. Well, in this case, the CVT cars could exceed 50 miles an hour in reverse. So they have these DAF reverse races, this historical series that's been there. So the entire grid is forced to run in reverse at over 50 miles an hour. And apparently it leads to some extreme comedy and some spectacular rollovers, because not everybody's adept at driving backwards. And I remember when you were telling me about teaching people executive protection security driving, which we did an episode on way back, how watching your side view mirrors was sort of the key to driving in reverse. And I kind of wonder, is that the technique they're using if they're driving around a road course, reverse?
Yeah, what are the rules in this series? Are the seats positioned backwards so you're looking out the back window? Do you have to sit normally so you have to like look behind you?
My understanding is they're looking forward, like it's a regular car set up like a regular drive, except they're just driving in reverse. So technique-wise, you could be looking in your rearview mirror, using your side view mirrors, craning your head behind you. I don't know, can you have a backup camera and just like look at it? I don't know how that works.
Can you look over your shoulder, or are you in a race seat and you're like locked in?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know. It's kind of a weird variant. And then in the UK at Silverstone, so legit track, they run this thing called the Burkett 6-Hour Rally. And it's usually around up to 70 teams competing of between 3 and 6 drivers in this rally format. The thing is, they don't drive the same car. They have to switch cars with each successive shift. And so through this relay format, they say there's usually around 300 cars taking place in one race. Each team has to lap the circuit as many times as they can within 6 hours, with only one car running at a time. And as that car comes into the pits, the next car gets dispatched out on the circuit. So they have to think about the strategy of which cars they're going to run in which order. And I guess the mix of cars is pretty wide because it's anything considered subject to the usual UK motorsport safety modification rules. So MGs and BMW M3s, we see TCR cars, we see midgets, we see old classic saloons, Caterhams, all kinds of crazy stuff, all the way up to modern racing cars that are in this relay race. So you might see a Mini Cooper hand off to a prototype, hand off to a MG in this race.
That is so crazy. Like, what a wild event to occur at such a prestigious track. You know, like it just seems like such a fun time. And I feel like that's where people are missing a lot in motorsports nowadays, especially on these like bigger, larger series.
Totally.
It's just the fun that you can have with cars and put on these crazy events and these one-off things. And like, it doesn't have to be serious all the time. And like, people gravitate towards stuff like that of just the sheer entertainment factor.
Totally. I mean, that's why we're doing these things in the first place, for the spectacle, for the enjoyment, for the sheer thrill that it gives us outside of the realm of day-to-day life, right? And this Burkett Rally is pretty funny. So there's actually 2 different awards that they have that teams are competing for. There's the outright victory, like who's fastest. They call that the scratch victory. But then there's the handicap victory. So they give teams credit laps that are calculated based on the cars and drivers per entry. So they're trying to do a little balance of performance thing to make sure, you know, the MGs competing against the LMP2 cars, there's like some realistic chance among them. So in the end, over the 6 hours, they apply this sort of calculation of credits and actual laps together to figure out who's actually beaten the rest. So that's the other kind of win in this Burkett 6-hour rally. There's more crazy stuff going on. There's another really, really interesting, like legit interesting race that happens over in Europe in Lithuania. Most people probably don't even know where that is, right? That's up near Finland and Latvia, and, you know, in that area. It's called the Orem 1,006-kilometer endurance race. You want to walk us through this a little bit? Because some of the aspects of this thing, I just can't help myself. Like, I laugh out loud every time I read these things. I look at footage about it. It's such a weird and wild. This is a wacky race as far as I'm concerned.
Well, the name of it, I don't know, it sounds pretty normal.
Yeah,
right?
right.
It just sounds like another endurance race of covering a certain amount of distance.
I mean, 1,006 is a sort of a weird increment, but like, okay, fine.
Yeah, and it's on a street circuit, which also, in regards to motorsports, sounds relatively normal.
Well, not just a street circuit, right?
It's a highway circuit. So this race actually occurs on a public highway system.
Not a street course, not through city, not through the historic center of Baku, Azerbaijan, or something like that. No. This is on the equivalent of the interstate highway.
And it's like an interchange. So it's like they effectively go down one bit of highway, they take an exit to make the change onto another bit of highway. They make a U-turn in the middle of the highway, like there's an opening in the guardrail. They make a U-turn to go back the other direction, and then take the exit and make some, interchanges and things like that on the effective interchanges of the highways, and then make another U-turn. So the course itself doesn't look very exciting because, how exciting can you make the interchange on a freeway be? But it's just crazy that it's like legitimately a street circuit, a highway system. And to kind of build on that, with it being a highway system, there's also the pit stop is legitimately a rest area that has a gas station.
Like a public gas station.
Yes. So you take the exit off the highway when you need to refuel your car, and you'll stop at the fuel station, and then your team is there with the pump to fill your car up. So it's kind of sick to see these legitimate teams go. Legitimate GT3 race cars and these crazy builds will go, but it's also kind of like the 24 Hours of Nürburgring where you can also bring a dinky little hatchback and be a part of the race. But it's crazy to see these legitimate race cars stopping at effectively a public fuel pump any other day of the week and getting filled up at the gas station and then launched back onto the track again.
Can you imagine? Of course they have to close this section of road right while this race is going on, but some unsuspecting, unaware family on vacation stops to go get gas at this gas station, and there's these cars coming through to do a pit stop style fuel up and fuel out, and people are just stopping to kind of stretch their legs and put gas in before they keep driving.
It's so cool, and it really reminds me of this isn't the first time the race series has done this, and it really reminds me of the old school DTM days of the 80s and the 90s. And I forget what track it was back then, but I remember it was the same thing. It was they used a highway system was a part of it, and they had the same sort of deal where they would come down and have to make the U-turn from basically eastbound traffic to westbound traffic. And that was kind of the thing back then of using these street circuits. It wasn't like how we think about street circuits nowadays of being in a major area of a city and doing these cool turns and all the 90-degree whatever. No, they were just using whatever they had available to make a motorsport event happen.
It's pretty amazing. As car enthusiasts, I think some of us do this, or at least I do. I sit there in my car imagining when I'm out on the public road, could you imagine if they ran a street race on this? Off of this off-ramp or through this cloverleaf interchange or something like that. And somebody over there in Lithuania was probably thinking exactly the same thing because that's what they do. And then something else I read about this really made me laugh. So in addition to this pit stop being in the pits in a gas station, which is public and available, this is a 1,006-kilometer race, right? So what's that, 600 miles long? So this is going to take some time, right? It's multiple hours of racing. And so drivers need to take a pit stop of their own, right? Need to go use the bathroom. Well, they actually have to go to this public gas station, ask the attendant for the key, and famously, the key is attached to a large block of wood, like a 2x4, so that people can't steal it.
That's hilarious.
I love that. You got to go take a leak during the race, and you have to go get the official key, and it's like the gas station bathroom key.
So that track that I was thinking about, it's called the Norris Ring.
Oh, that one's amazing.
And it's still active. Or it might not be currently active, it might still be, but they've been racing at that place in Germany up until kind of recent years. And it was part of DTM and a bunch of other series that have been able to use it. There's that other track that was even more famous that was kind of a big long stretch into a U-turn into a big long stretch.
Oh, Avis.
The Avis ring.
Avos, yeah.
And same sort of mindset. And so it's kind of cool to see these kind of historical tracks or historical quote unquote street circuits, but the vibe over in Europe is totally different than what we're used to over here in the States.
Yeah, that Norris Ring race was very famous. Apparently they call it the Franconian Monaco. So it's just
hilarious.
Kind of a cool variation on that. And there's some really cool street races that, again, they're all one-offs, right? Because they close down some public area and amount of road for this race to take place, and it's during a limited time, and then they open it up, and during the rest of the year, it's just streets. So they do this in Macau, which is a small island in Asia that's known as a gambling place, kind of like Vegas. And they run this street race on a really crazy course with a really narrow section, kind of reminiscent of that Baku street race in Azerbaijan. And then there's another one that takes place in France in a city called PAU, which makes for really excellent racing, and I've seen a bunch of things there. And these kind of one-off places would make such exciting venues to bring unexpected series. I'd love to see some of these come back. And, I think we could probably speculate for ourselves some places that would be amazing to have our own one-off races. Driving around here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we're so blessed with the kind of roads and just the scenery and everything here. Can you imagine, like, for me, the ultimate would be the San Francisco street race.
Oh, I feel like that's the ultimate for, like, any kid. Like, if you ever played Crazy Taxi or, like, all these, like,
Outrun
arcade games, which they had a run through San Francisco, like, everyone knows San Francisco's iconic hills and the roads and how they have, like, the tabletops and, like, the really steep roadways into basically a flat intersection and then another steep roadway again.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if you could, like, convince some series and the city of San Francisco to close down the streets and build a circuit like we've played in the video games where, like, there could be jumps?
It would be unreal. I mean, even if you didn't do that much elevation, there's some very cool places around the city and scenery and stuff to bring into that. But then, yeah, bring in those hills, bring in some of those tabletops, some of those.
Oh, yeah.
Drive over some cable car tracks. We
can invite the stadium super trucks.
Oh, hell yeah.
Those things can take some jumps.
That would be interesting. Red Bull a couple years ago did this thing they used to call the Flugtag, which was like their flying day.
Uh-huh.
And they shut down Fillmore Street in San Francisco, covered it in snow, and made it a ski jump.
See, like, that would be pretty sick. I think doing that, but with cars and putting a circuit together would be insane.
Okay, dude. So ready? San Francisco hill climb to the top of Twin Peaks.
Also would be an awesome event.
Yeah, I think there's so many of these. What are yours? What are your sort of dreamed up one-off races? Like, if you could bring these things together or have it be in a venue where there's not occurring today, what would you do?
So I think one of them is kind of a throwback to the old days of the 50s and 60s, and that was back when the Indy 500 was part of the F1 calendar.
Oh, yeah.
That you needed to compete as an F1 team in the Indy 500 for the championship. And I think that was such a cool era back then because there was kind of the Europeans versus the Americans of these F1 teams that would come over and they would bring their roadsters, which the engines were in the rear or mid-engine, and then they reversed the American roadsters, which the engines were in the front. And you kind of had this duality during the Indy 500. And the Indy 500 is such an unbelievable event as it is. And so my crazy idea is, like, why couldn't, I know why, but, like, to do that again in modern era where it was like, bring F1 over and it's F1 versus IndyCar in the 500.
Oh, wow.
So F1 cars and Indy cars together. And I think nowadays those cars are the closest they've ever been, somewhat in regards to dimensions. They both have hybrid systems. There's a lot of similarities in the crossover. I don't know how they would compare in regards to top speed around the 500 track.
Yeah, but they both do that push to pass kind of thing now.
Yes. And the thing is like, all right, eliminate the DRS systems on the F1 cars when they come over because Indy cars don't have it. But say it like, a couple generations ago, back in the late 20-teens, 2018, 2019, those cars looked nothing like an Indy car.
That's right.
But now at least if you put those two cars side by side, you're like, they kind of look similar. Like, yeah, that one's an F1, that one's an IndyCar, but they kind of have similar wheelbases. They have similar bodywork. Like, I don't think it's too far-fetched of doing a crazy one-off event like that.
It would sort of be the race of the halos versus the aero screens.
That's another funny way to look at it, of which one has the better aerodynamics on the oval. But
yeah, and this is legit though. I mean, because back you were talking about when they were doing this in the 50s. That's when this idea of the Triple Crown in racing was introduced.
Yes.
And we've had one person in all of history, Graham Hill, who has achieved the Triple Crown, which is the Indy 500, the Grand Prix at Monaco, and the 24-hour of Le Mans, having victories at each of those.
Right, and that was back when you could take one car and do all three of those races. Where nowadays, if you wanted to complete the Triple Crown, you have to do so in basically three different machinery.
That's right.
And so it's like, yes, I mean, things need to diverge and they need to be specialized in their own ways, but why aren't there ways that we can bring things back together and do these crazy crossover events? That would be cool. And like race the Indy 500 in a multi-class, like have it be the F1 class versus the IndyCar class, but doing them at the same time once again, just like we did back in the day.
That would be sick. This is kind of a variation on this I've thought about, which is what if they took the current generation of, let's say, F1 cars and created a class for the last generation of F1 cars? I think we talked about this on our multi-class racing episode. So yeah, that's another sort of a one-off where we could bring historics and modern cars together, or things from different classes or eras that just didn't have a chance to be in competition together. I think that's another element that could bring some excitement into these sort of venues.
Yeah, and kind of like going off on that, because my other idea, it kind of goes around the Indy 500 or like a marquee event like that, is I would love to see, whether it's in IndyCar, NASCAR, F1, that they pick one race out of the season and they do hand-painted liveries again.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this is more prevalent in like the IndyCar days of like back in the old days when people would still hand-paint the cars. They'd put on the name of like the car owner, the car builder, the car engineer, that sort of deal. And I think it'd be really cool if like if everyone was required to work with an artist, which is a dying art in and of itself.
That's right.
And kind of bring that back into the showcase of like, there's too much of this technology with like the liveries in regards to wraps and vinyl, and you can do all these crazy things and whatever. It's like, let's do a little homage back to like the old days and the simplistic ways and like actually putting paint on metal versus just vinyl. And everyone has the same disadvantage of quote unquote the additional weight of paint because everyone has to do it. And like F1 could do it at Monaco. The Indy cars could do it at the 500. NASCAR could do it at North Wilkesboro for like a throwback event or whatever it is. Like, I think it'd be cool for like a marquee one-off event, hand-painted cars, cool old school liveries.
That'd be super cool. And I think you'd have a hard time getting over considering how many sponsor logos are on cars these days. Maybe you could say, look, they need to be hand painted, but you can designate like a little section for all your brand logos or whatever you need to have. But like the whole idea is that approaching this like an art project for this one-off thing, we want this to be special and unique and not to be like what we always do.
Right, and kind of this huge combination of art cars, and like art used to be a huge part of motorsports, and this craftsmanship that would go into it, and like livery design used to be such an artistic thing, and I think we've lost a lot of that in motorsport. And
fabrication, right? When people used to build race cars, they'd be banging on pieces of sheet metal. They'd be like, this is a physical thing that was being done. It wasn't just a bunch of computers in a factory, you know, like injection molding plastic, and like when you're done, there's a car.
Yeah, and not to mention, I mean, for these teams, think about how much merchandise you'd sell on this like one-off cool art installation of like the die-cast, the t-shirts, the hats, the whatever. So like you could get some return on having to pay an artist to paint your car.
Yeah, this is where we need to get the friend who works at Hot Wheels. Was that Chucho's friend?
Yeah.
Be like, look, we need to do a one-off race series of cars that run those series. So let's just do a whole special edition of that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that'd be great.
All over that. Well, any other ones? Do you have any other kind of one-off, like, I wish someday if it was up to me, if I had a magic wand, here's the one-off race that I would create?
Thinking about NASCAR, and I was trying to think of like, what can they do? And they've kind of done it all, right? In the sense of they've gone overseas, they've gone into street circuits, they've gone into more road courses, they do these one-off marquee events, they've raced on dirt. It's like, damn, like what is like, if I was in the NASCAR boardroom, I'd be like, what is the last thing that we can do to like bring NASCAR into like, quote, this market?
Go back like 3 generations of car.
Well, okay, yes, I would agree with that 100% of go backwards with your technology. Make the cars do 200 miles an hour again. Like, why are we slowing them down? But I was thinking, I was like, maybe the last thing that NASCAR hasn't done is an endurance race. And I know you're going to say asterisks they have because the Garage 56 car at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Okay, yeah, but that was one car. Like, that wasn't NASCAR as an organization putting on an endurance race.
No, a 24-hour of NASCAR would be really interesting.
A 24-hour NASCAR race on an oval, probably preferably Daytona. They already have the lights installed, so we don't have to like worry about that piece of it. And they already do endurance racing. But a 24-hour NASCAR race. And I feel like the question is, well, like, how would you do that? Because in endurance racing, we need multiple drivers to be able to switch out of the car. Well, what if each team competed against one another? So it was Hendrick versus RCR versus 2311 versus
Joe Gibbs.
And so on. And so each team competed against one another. So like, yeah, you might only have 8 or 9 cars on track, but it's like the battle of the teams. And like within those teams, they have 3 to 4 drivers. So, like, we have enough people. If you need to bring in an extra person to get up to 4 for your team, you can invite someone and just run the 24 hours of Daytona oval style.
I have a variation that a lot of my friends who have been crew for race teams would love to hear this one. How about this? So you build your teams out of those drivers, and then you probably have your test driver or your like up and coming, junior driver or something on the team. How about every team has to make one of their race engineers drive?
Ooh.
Because race engineers have a really interesting insight into the dynamics and handling and performance of a car, and a lot of them don't have a lot of experience in the seat.
So that's like your handicap.
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of like your sim racer, right? Like, yeah, they know how to do a thing academically. Now put them in the real thing. So we're going to take the race engineer who's all day long looking at charts and graphs trying to tell some other guy how to be faster. Let's put him in the seat.
Yeah, that'd be funny. Or just like make it its own special event of like the engineers race.
Yeah.
Where it's like all the
Undercard.
engineers have to get in the car and then jump in and do a handful of laps and like see whose engineer's the best behind the wheel.
That would be a blast. I mean, I just get stuck on this like San Francisco Bay Area race. Highway 280 would make the most phenomenal high-speed
That would be sick.
highway section. I mean, there's just so many variations on this that would be really fun. And I'm sure friends who live in other geographies would say, oh, you got to do a Tail of the Dragon drive, or you got to do a whatever, those kind of things.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see like more hill climbs pop up in the States. Because, I mean, like there are such phenomenal roads in the Bay Area, like around Saratoga, CA9, La Honda,
Oh, you mean the Nineberg Ring?
See, and like people already compete on it, which, arguably is lame of competing on public roads late at night, but like make it a legitimate event. Close it down. Like if you're the city of Saratoga and you're pissed off that these kids keep racing up the mountain, like put on an event, like close down the road, do a Saratoga hill climb or whatever it is. And same thing down in LA, do an Angeles Crest or a Malibu hill climb for those famous roads.
So that reminded me, I had to look up this thing. I saw a business card that somebody had from back in the day, and it says Mulholland Raceway International, largest amateur road race course. It goes from Laurel Canyon to Coldwater Canyon on Mulholland Drive. It says, any night from dusk till dawn, this car admits one.
See, like, that's hilarious. Or like the Snake. Remember, like the Snake is such a famous bit of road down in LA, and it was closed down for a really long time. Like the Snake as a roadway doesn't go from anywhere to anywhere. You can close it down and like it does not affect traffic in any sort of way. And it's like, how cool would that be of like the Snake hill climb and like
super cool.
And like there's ways to do this, shut down roads, get the insurance, put on an event because it happens elsewhere. It happens over in Europe all the time. Like it's just not that popular in America. And even some road courses here in California have started to do hill climbs as well. Yes, they've been kind of one-off events with like a special organization putting them on, but they've happened, right? There's been a hill climb here at Sonoma Raceway, which I participated in during the Velocity Invitational.
Super cool.
It was a one of one. They haven't done it since, but they raced from the start-finish line at Sonoma Raceway backwards to the top of the carousel.
That's super cool.
And like, when have you ever gotten the opportunity to run a race course backwards?
Yeah, Sonoma, Thunderhill, they do these like one-offs very rarely if you can get away with it.
Exactly. And then Laguna Seca has done a Laguna Seca hill climb where you race from the start-finish line to the top of the corkscrew backwards. And so like, once again, like putting on these fun, cool events and like making people interested in doing these motorsport events because they are so unique and kind of one-off and get you excited. But I could totally see like doing the Lick Observatory hill climb. That's a crazy road. Like,
Heck
I'm
yeah.
sure we'd have to look into like some safety precautions, but I mean, hell, Pikes Peak doesn't. Like, it's a major event.
Yeah,
They don't have to put anything up.
Totally. The road from Lick Observatory across Mount Hamilton is a grueling, twisty stretch of road that will be really interesting for a race.
Yeah, and it's like there could be these cool things. I understand there's a lot of like probably red tape and permits and all this sort of stuff that deters you, but like...
Yeah, but that doesn't exist in our fantasy world, so we can think of whatever we
True,
want.
valid.
All right, so I'm going to just say Lombard Street hill climb. All the way go. Yeah, there's Vermont Street is technically twistier and tighter, but now Vermont Street doesn't look as nice as Lombard. Everybody knows Lombard. It's a big hill. It's switchbacks. Let's go. Well, this has been really fun. I think we could speculate all day long on what kind of race we would want to invent, but I think all of these, I'd say what we proposed wasn't that far afield from the things that actually exist.
Right, exactly. Like going through some of these stories and looking back on these one-off races that have happened, you might think to yourself like, damn, they actually did that? So like, thinking about the ideas that we have, I don't think are too far-fetched from like the craziness that has happened in the past.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, for the fans, for the listeners, I'm going to leave you with one last thing that you can go search yourself and watch, because it is worth a watch, of these one-off wacky races. And that was when, over in France, they did an oval race on a bicycle course with banked turns, but it was made for cycling. And they did it with the Citroën Amy, which is the city car, the quad cycle that they call it.
Oh, that's super cool.
They actually broadcasted this race live on Twitch. So if you want to see a crazy race go down, go ahead and look up Citroën Amy Oval Race, France.
Wow, on your way out to the velodrome, you didn't expect to see motorized four-wheel vehicles, did you?
Well, thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Alice.
And thanks for listening. This has been Cold Start.